Would you like to know how to stop your watercolours from drying out too fast, or to get that lovely misty effect in your paintings? I'm Karen Rice, and I'm going to share with you the tips that I use in this Misty Tree tutorial using just 2 colours. Shall we get started? This is the gorgeous reference photograph I'm using, and a link for this can be found in the description below. Just click show more or the little down arrow just beneath the video. I've sketched in the drawing for my painting with an HB pencil on cold press watercolour paper. I'm using Ultramarine and Burnt Sienna. My first tip to stop your painting from drying out is, at this stage, really spend quite a long time wetting your paper, so that you actually make sure that it's really nicely soaked, and let the water soak into the membranes of the paper, and then wet it again so it stops your paper drying out too quickly. If you find your paper still dries out quickly, go to a smaller size and keep practicing it until you get more confidence. Another tip I'd like to share with you is make sure you prepared your paint, your washes, before you wet your paper. It gives you more time. So I'm painting this burnt sienna wet into wet in the middle of the sky, over the distant trees and the fields and roads, over the tree as well on the right hand side. It's a very, very thin wash. By putting a wet wash on top of a wet painting, you're kind of re-wetting the paper again, and it gives you more time because you're basically wetting the paper again with colour, so it prevents it from drying out too quickly. I'm now applying a thin wash of ultramarine with my size 14 brush in the top part of the sky. Now painting using my size 6 round brush, a creamier burnt sienna wash on its own, and just dropping it in below the horizon on the left hand side. And I'm using the size 10 brush and painting wet in wet that hedgerow on the right hand side. I'm now painting in the distant trees, and I'm using my size 6 brush, and I'm painting damp into wet. So I'm actually, if you saw there, I took a little bit of the excess paint off on my kitchen towel, so that made the paintbrush damp, so it doesn't run too much into the sky. And I'm doing the same here now. I've mixed up, as you can see there, taking the excess off. I've mixed up a mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna to make this sort of grey wash, and as you can see there, again taking out the excess, and that means the paint's damp and the paper surface is either wet or damp, so it gives a nice soft edge and it doesn't run too much, so it creates this look of the distant trees. And I'm doing the same thing into this sort of larger tree in the distance, using a mixture of the ultramarine and the burnt sienna mixed together with the size 6 brush, damp into damp. If you find your paper is drying at this stage, give it a very fine mist with your spritzer bottle, and just keep an eye on the surface of the paper. If it's looking matte and there's no sheen, stop painting, blow dry your painting, and then wet it again when it's dry with clean water, and begin again, wet into wet, damp into damp, so you get those lovely soft edges. It's really being aware about what your paper's doing, how warm or cool your room is, what sort of type of paper you're using. Some dry quicker than others, and it's really getting that feel for it. But the best thing to do if you find things are drying too quickly, just go to a smaller scale and build up that confidence and play using this technique, the damp into damp, wet into wet, trying to create these misty scenes. And as you can see here, I'm using a combination of the burnt sienna and then burnt sienna with a touch of ultramarine to make a brownish colour, and I'm painting wet in wet and then damp into wet using creamier colours with my size 6 brush. And it's a really good exercise, this, just to play with the watercolour. If you look at the painting behind, the painting now has dried off a bit and it looks a lot paler, and you've got these strong, richer, creamier colours in the foreground. And there I've actually added a little bit of ultramarine, quite creamy, not so much water, and painting this damp into damp. And what you get with damp into damp is the paint doesn't run so much, so you get soft edges but sort of more definite sort of shapes and marks. using the plastic card cut up just to draw out the paint to create these lovely thin lines and scratch into the surface of the watercolour paper to create some lovely textures. I've allowed my painting to dry and I'm wetting the sky area again. Do this very gently because you don't want to disturb the paint underneath. So I'm working on the right hand side of the painting, and this again also helps with the drying time, so you're just sort of concentrating on one section and it gives you more time so you can concentrate it. And I'm sponging damp into damp, a mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna mixed up together with a natural sponge, but you could use a synthetic sponge as well. The sponge is damp and I've wrung all the water out and it creates this lovely diffused soft sort of foliage. And I'm painting some burnt sienna on its own, wet into wet or damp into wet. The paint's quite creamy and it's just fun. Look how it's just running there, it's gorgeous. And just sort of softening these colours, it goes towards the distance. The tonal value isn't as strong to create depth. And now I'm just mixing up ultramarine and burnt sienna together here to create this lovely dark. And if you look at the reference photograph, it's really, really dark on the right hand side. And I'm painting this damp into damp with really creamy paint. I'm just sprinkling a little bit of sea salt onto the damp paint and I'm going to let that dry so it can create some lovely textures. There we are, the painting has dried and I'm brushing off the salt and look at that yummy texture there, it's gorgeous. I'm actually putting a little thin line in the distance there just to sort of create a little bit of detail. I'm using my size 2 brush and a pale mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm wetting the entire road with my size 14 brush and I put a very thin wash of ultramarine and burnt sienna mixed together, but I want to keep the top of the road, the distant road, nice and light. I've mixed up some creamier ultramarine with a touch of burnt sienna, and I'm going to put a little bit of a darker shade just in the foreground, so you can just exaggerate that lighter tone in the distance with the darker tone in the foreground to give your painting depth, but also maybe to create some shadow from the trees on the right hand side. I'm using my size 10 damp brush to take off some paint to create some light areas for some directional lines on my road. Just sponging in now, wet on dry, a mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna to create some lovely textured foliage. I'm painting in the branches of these main foreground trees with my size 6 brush. I'll be using my size 2 brush and my twig to create the smaller branches, and it's quite a dark mixture of the ultramarine and the burnt sienna. I've turned my painting upside down because I find it easier sometimes to paint branches this way because I'm pulling the paint towards me rather than going upwards. It's just something personal to me, but you may find this easier also. Why not give it a try? As you saw there, I'm just finishing off with a little bit of sponging of the Ultramarine Burnt Siennas, a little bit of a darker shade, wet on dry, just to give that final little bit of texture. I'm just popping a little bit more detail on the left hand side using my size 6 brush, just to give a little bit of extra sort of plant and vegetation to bring it forward from the background. A few little markings in the road with my size 2 brush, just to kind of again give a little bit of perspective, lead the eye through. It creates so much depth, and I'm just softening with a damp brush. I'm going to finish off with a little spatter, as I love to do with my size 2 brush. I've just made sure I protected my sky area. I'm removing my framing tape to reveal a lovely white border. It really gives me the opportunity to assess my painting to see if I need to make any more changes. I really hope you enjoy this tutorial with lots of tips and techniques, especially how to prevent your watercolour paintings from drying out too quickly, and ways to get around that, including maybe painting on a smaller scale, preparing your washes beforehand, really wetting your paper, and keep an eye on the paper surface to see where the sheen is and how wet or dry your brushes have to be. I really hope you found all those tips useful and that you implement them in your future watercolour paintings. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please don't hesitate to ask and put them in the comments section below. I would love to hear from you. If you would like to see more tutorials like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll get updates of my latest videos. For longer, more informative videos with lots more tips and techniques and voiceovers with drawing templates, why not consider joining my Patreon membership? Details about that are in the top right hand corner and in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.